This film will focus on globalization and its effects on international education and specifically look at the present-day education of girls and women in Iraq. So what is globalization? There is a grey area on the exact definition of globalization, and many people interpret the meaning differently. Friedman defines globalization as creating an integration of markets, nation-states and technologies in a way that is enabling individuals, corporations and nation-states to reach around the world farther, faster, deeper and cheaper than ever before. It is the process of the world becoming more connected and has enabled the transfer of 3 billion people, goods and cultures all over the world with great ease and speed, therefore giving everybody equal opportunities. How does globalization affect education? Globalization has influenced the development of new education ideas in many parts of the world. This is due to a country's education being linked to their social and economic development. Naturally, with increased globalization and movement within the world, these education ideas also travel with this increased movement and has enabled countries to create international models of education together. It is international organisations such as UNESCO and the United Nations that give countries the chance to share their educational policies and practices with one another as well as globally. An international organisation can be defined as an organisation which can either be run by the government or not and has an international presence and can have members from many places around the world. It was education in the USA that prompted other countries to make similar goals to help improve living standards within their countries. It is due to this that the Education for All Act emerged. International organisations aided with setting up the Education for All Act and is a great example of how international organisations can help education not just in countries of the West but in all countries globally. The Education for All Act emerged during the 1990 World Conference for All, where there was 155 countries and 150 organisations present, which all came together to develop and promote a universal agreement to provide access to free, compulsory primary education for all children by the year 2000. Also, it was agreed that any barriers to education must be eliminated to successfully achieve gender equality, which mostly affects the girls and women across many countries. Unfortunately, these goals had not been met by the year 2000. Due to the rapid population increase in the last 10 years, it had meant that countries could not keep up with providing free primary schooling for all children fast enough, and rapid acceleration would be needed to actually achieve universal primary education. In the year 2000, there were 100 million children worldwide out of primary education. 58 million of these were girls, so gender equality and removal of educational barriers for girls had also not been achieved. Interestingly, this rapid acceleration in the population numbers caused the amount of children not in primary education in 2000 to be more than in 1990. Since the Education for All, the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainability Goals are now the leading movement for universal access to education and gender equality across the globe. The first deadline for these goals was in 2015, which is now being extended to 2030 due to being unable to reach these goals. Whether international organisations are helping enough is the question, or whether the goals are simply too ambitious. International organisations are often influenced by the ways of the Western countries, and these countries often make up a significant amount of them. So the international model of education which these organisations construct reflects the way of life of these wealthy and powerful countries, and therefore the dominant style of education in these Western countries are being imposed on the less developed countries across the world. It is argued that this power over what is taught leads to a loss of culture and heritage of developing countries, as it may lead to exploitation within these countries and erosion of cultural traditions and native languages. Some believe that globalization has the potential to disempower people by colonization and facilitate a loss of individualism, self and identity. On the other hand, some people believe that the introduction of westernized education into developing countries can be beneficial and provide more positive opportunities in the lives of the people that live there because it can promote social and economic growth. It is suggested that this westernization can improve jobs, provide empowerment through more employment opportunities and social identity, and support and facilitate mobilization within countries. How does globalization actually affect developing countries, and do international organizations really help to improve the lives of girls in these countries? Iraq, for example, is home to roughly 10.9 million illiterate adults and roughly 3.1 million illiterate children. However, females are at the most disadvantaged, making up 6.3 million of the illiterate adults. Interestingly, illiterate levels are relatively similar for both boys and girls in Iraq between ages 15 and 24, suggesting that gender equality is a goal in Iraq which is actively being worked towards. It has also been found that 75% of girls who start primary school either drop out during or at the end of primary school, and therefore do not go on to secondary education. Shockingly, many of these girls would have dropped out just after grade 1. Furthermore, it's been found that 5.4% of boys are not in primary education, but there are more than double at 11.4% of girls who are also not in school. Gender equality within teachers is also still apparent in Iraq, with only 3% of female teachers completing their teacher training in 2000, and has little increased since then. Whereas comparing this to the gender differences in the UK, in 2013 70% of all teachers were female and only 30% were male, so this is the opposite situation to the Iraq. So the question is, why when educating girls is the highest returning investment available in the developing world and has a multiplier effect, is there more than twice as many girls out of education as there are boys in Iraq? There are many barriers which can prevent girls and women from being educated in Iraq, even with local, national and international policies which are in place to attempt to prevent this. Access to schools in some part of Iraq are very limited, making the journey to school for some girls extremely long and unsafe. This is due to a lack of schools in extremely remote rural areas and the large marshy areas, making it unsafe to travel, and especially in times of war. There is a significant difference between enrolment rates in schools of girls in comparison to boys, which can be explained by a prioritisation of boys' education over girls in terms of allocation of schools, attention to hygiene and security in schools. Because of these obstacles in continuing education, many girls are turning to culturally encouraged alternatives such as marriage and staying at home to care for the household. Also, education is not seen as a particularly important aspect in the life for women. It may explain why there is low amounts of female teachers, which means there is a lack of female role models within schools. There are a large lack of resources in schools as well. There are large disparities in the distribution of supplies, as well as large disparity in facilities such as libraries and laboratories within schools. Not only this, but girls are not attending schools because of the lack of security and poor infrastructure, as the physical conditions of the schools and poor sanitation makes it unsuitable for girls. It has also been reported that the current curriculum is outdated and does not meet the current learning needs of students. So what are the solutions to this? The government of Iraq believe that through working with international organisations, more schemes can be initiated and therefore more objectives can be achieved with respect to gender equality across all of Iraq. And to implement these beliefs, Iraq has begun to address these issues. For girls who usually travel a long distance to school, UNESCO and the government of Iraq have launched a satellite channel called Iraqi EDU324, which aims to increase access to education even in the most remote areas and support distance learning. The teaching of life skills and promoting of civic values such as human rights are being increased into the school curriculum to provide a well-rounded education for both boys and girls, but this initiative aims to help girls in their communities during and after finishing education. Also, there are continuing programs to improve and update Iraqi textbooks in schools. 18 million primary and secondary textbooks have been created, making the learning resources more applicable to girls in the modern age rather than concentrating on old outdated traditions which provide barriers to girls being educated. UNESCO has constructed a model secondary school for girls in Baghdad on its own budget as its contribution to providing updated educational facilities for girls' education, which also gives a working example for the government of Iraq to follow in order to encourage more girls to stay in school and continue with their education, and it also protects them from abuse and violence. UNESCO has also aided with the establishment of new community centres throughout Iraq, which provides a safe environment and promotes empowerment for women and girls to meet without any males, which many women are not able to do due to cultural traditions. These schemes have improved lives within the communities by improving access to education and making it much easier, and safer places have been created and girls are enabled to develop various skills and freely interact with other girls and women around them. UNESCO and the government of Iraq have been attempting to provide improved education to all areas around Iraq and not just to the capital city, enabling more and more women across Iraq to have an empowering experience of education. It can be seen that with increasing help from international organisations, there is a light at the end of the tunnel for girls in Iraq. So with continuing help from international countries and organisations, and by not enforcing other cultures and beliefs but adapting them to benefit the girls of Iraq, gender equality in education might not be as far away as it sometimes seems.